Hi there! Hillary here for Waterlogged on behalf of saltwateraquarium.com. If you've caught some of my recent videos, you know that I've been doing some aquabiomics testing on this tank behind me. First video, I talked about how to take a sample for aquabiomics, and the second video, we talked about what the environmental DNA looks like in this tank. In this video, we're going to meet with Eli again, and we're going to talk about what the microbiome in this tank looks like, so stay tuned. I mentioned in the last video that we tested the environmental DNA. We went over that in the previous one, but this one, we're going to go over the microbiome results. Eli, I'm going to let you go through this.
So the first thing I look at in the microbiome report, scroll down to the diversity score. So this is a score that compares your tank with all the other tanks and asks, how many different types of microbes did we find in your community? And how does that compare with other reef tanks we've sampled? And yours was pretty typical, a reasonably diverse tank, a reasonably diverse community, 243. That's right around the middle of the distribution, the 54th percentile. So pretty typical. A score like this, in my view, doesn't suggest any changes are needed. This is a number that asks, how normal is that community? So diversity is how many different types. It looks at the composition and it asks, what kind of bacteria do you have in your tank? Are they the normal kinds or some unusual kinds? And what are their levels like? Are they at the normal levels, or is it dominated by some type that's usually very rare? You have quite a low balance score, so this suggests a very unusual community. Every tank with a high balance score will look almost identical in terms of its community. There's a lot of different ways to deviate from that normal community. Okay, so to figure out what's unusual about your community, let's go down to the next figure. So this figure compares the composition of the community in your sample with the composition in a typical mature reef tank. And it's color-coded so we can forget about the hard to pronounce names and just look at some of the bars here and discuss them that way. I'm just going to go down from the top of your sample and highlight a few things that are unusual about your sample.
Okay.
So midway down, about a third of the way from the top, you see this big brown bar, kind of a light brown.
Yeah.
In your sample. And if you compare that to the typical sample, you'll see in the typical sample, it's much lower. It's present in the typical sample, but at much, much lower levels. And so now if we look over to the color code and figure out what is this group, this is a family called the Methylophylacea. To learn more about that, let's scroll down and learn more about it. You can click on additional details about the excess families, and it will open up this tab. And we'll scroll down to that group. And what we see is the following. I just want to unpack these statistics for the viewer. So there's only one type of bacteria from this family in your tank, and it makes up a shocking almost 11% of the community. Just one type making up almost 11% of the community. That's not common. Usually individual types make up a smaller fraction of the community. You know, the family altogether may make up a large fraction. So this is kind of unusual to find such a high level of just one type. However, it's a reasonably common type to find in reef tanks. About 13% of reef tanks have this particular type in them. So it's not unusual to be present, but it's unusual to be present at such a high level.
And it says it's unclassified, so we don't know what specifically it is, just that it's there.
So we know that we can identify this DNA sequence down to the level of family, and that's this name Methylophylacea. That's the name of the family. If we try to go below that and ask what genus, what species, we can't identify it further. It turns out this type in your tank, it matches other unclassified members of this family that are in the database. They've never been assigned a name by scientists to the genus and species level. So in other words, it's not some new thing that scientists have never seen before. It's just nobody's gotten to the point of culturing that thing and describing it to a species level. Right now, it doesn't have a name.
So, so if somebody were watching this and really ambitious, they could be like, "Oh, I'm going to do that. That's going to be my PhD. I
Sure.
can describe this."
Yeah. I mean, that's the case, honestly, with the great majority of bacteria that we find here. There's
Mhm.
a lot unknown about them. Let's go back to the community as a whole. As we go through your community composition plot, the next thing that catches my eye is this pink bar in the middle of the screen. This family is the Mycobacteriaceae. And with your background, you're probably aware this includes some nasty human pathogens, the ones that cause tuberculosis and leprosy. It also includes some opportunistic pathogens that sometimes infect people with aquariums. So there are some infections that people report to emergency rooms, and it turns out to come from their aquarium. One of them is Mycobacterium marinum. This is one of the widely described infections you can get from your aquarium. So very interesting to ask, okay, what kind of mycobacterium do you have in your tank? So again, we can
Yes.
scroll down here, click on additional details, and we go to the Mycobacteriaceae. And there's a few things we can say about this. One, unfortunately, none of the ones in your tank are identified to the species level. We got them down to the genus level, not just the family, but the genus. So we know it's
Mhm.
the genus Mycobacterium. Let's zero in. So this first one at the top, 50327, this is the most abundant member of the family from your tank, made up 3% of the DNA in your tank. So that's quite unusual. So look at that. It only shows up in 0.2% of tanks we've sampled. So it's a rare type present at an unusually high level in your tank. I looked into the sequence, checked it against a different database to ask, does it match any of the other known types? I can
Oh.
tell you it does not match Mycobacterium marinum. It's the most commonly reported cause of these aquarium infections. It's much more similar to some other undescribed types. So we can exclude the known pathogens.
Mhm.
We can't exclude unknown pathogens. And as we discussed, there's ways to follow up on this.
Mhm.
If you're still interested, we could pursue this further and follow up on this with a separate mycobacterium specific test that we're working on in the background. At some
Oh.
point, perhaps that'll be offered, as a general service. Right now, it's something we have available as a way to follow up on interesting results.
I feel like, at least for me, when I got this report, that was the one thing that stuck out of my mind. I was like, oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
immediately went and ordered like a pair of like shoulder length gloves. I was like, oh, I've heard too
Yep.
many horror stories of
Yeah.
people getting mycobacteria infections and all sorts of problems.
When I started with reef keeping, I was quite casual about siphoning, starting a siphon with my mouth and putting my hands in the tank, whether I had cuts on my hands or not. Um,
Hmm.
After 5 years analyzing, bacterial DNA from reef tanks, I'm a little more cautious about these things now. Yeah, I think those precautions may be reasonable. If we scroll down through the rest of your report, there's lots of other good news. Let's look at the nitrophone community. These ones responsible for cleaning up basically animal waste, right? The fish waste products and maintaining a good water quality in your tank. And you've got nice high levels. So two things to say here. It's a complete community. You have both the ammonia oxidizers and the nitrite oxidizers. So that's a positive finding. The other thing we can say is the levels, normal to even on the high end. So your ammonia oxidizers are actually above the 90th percentile, and the nitrite oxidizers are close to the 90th percentile. So nice high levels and a complete community. That's great. Cyanobacteria, didn't find any evidence of this in your tank. And really, best of all, we get down here to the pathogens. None of the known fish or coral pathogens showed up in your sample. And we also have a list of suspected coral pathogens that are kind of loosely associated with disease. Didn't see those either. Um,
Yes.
so that's good news. I suspect you were pretty careful about setting this tank up to achieve over a year old tank, fish and corals, but you have no evidence of pathogens.
It's cool because you're kind of echoing what I see.
Always glad to hear when it's consistent with what you can see with the naked eye.
So I know we're getting close to time here, but real quick, I wanted to show people, can you scroll up and show us like if they wanted to click on one of the links that takes them to more info. Can you show us
Yeah,
how to
thank
get
you.
there?
That's a really important point for clients to be aware of, that I've tried to provide you with a lot of information about these groups. It's not printed in the report, but it's linked in the report. So I'll give you one example. This family, the Pelagibacteriaceae. If you click on the link, you can learn a lot more about what this family indicates. Got some general description here. I've got some statistics about how frequently it shows up in reef tanks and at what levels. And I've got some links to other resources. We also have suggestions in some cases for what the client can do to affect this family. So in your case, you had high levels of this family. If you wanted to reduce those levels, this would absolutely do it. Again, I'm not suggesting it, but I'm just pointing out the structure of the resource. The report told you you had high levels. You click the link on that family name and it takes you to this page, which gives you some suggestions about how you may adjust those levels.
I like that. So there's a lot of resources that are available. You just have to take that extra step and click to get there.
That's right. Yeah. And as we discussed the other day, in some cases, these links are going to take you to a place that's not as informative. Some of the links will just take you to Wikipedia. Now, the one that I picked here, just kind of randomly, actually turned out to be a fairly informative link on Wikipedia. But sometimes you click those links and all it says is, well, this is a family of bacteria.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, thanks. So the way my process works is, if I have already made a page describing that family, then that page gets included in the report. But if that page doesn't exist yet, then my program looks for a Wikipedia link and puts that in. Yeah, so if anybody does want to order a kit, just share the order button. The turnaround time is 2 to 4 weeks. Our average is about 3 weeks. We operate in batches every 2 weeks.
All right, Eli. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for this opportunity. I'm always looking for a chance to walk people through how to interpret these reports, because I know it can be a little daunting when you first open it up and see this long list of scientific names. So
Yes.
I hope that helped clear some of it up.
I've got to give a huge thank you to Eli from Aquabiomics. Thank you for taking the time to go through all of these test results and share a little bit more in-depth meaning on what it means. Now, if these videos have inspired you, if you are interested in getting the aquabiome in your tank tested and having some more information on it, well, Eli has been generous enough to give us a 20% off code. Now, this is only going to be good for the first 30 days after this video is released, so check out the caption, give this video a like, get your code, and go get your tank tested. All right, this has been Hillary for Waterlogged on behalf of saltwateraquarium.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you next time.